The storm outside had cut the power hours ago, leaving the isolated single-story house in total darkness except for the occasional flash of lightning through the tall living room windows. Sitting alone on his worn leather couch, Daniel pulled his blanket tighter around his shoulders. He had moved into this place 6 months ago, drawn to its complete isolation at the edge of the woods. It was a simple modern design with concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a completely flat rubberized roof. There was no second floor, no attic, and no crawl space beneath the foundation, just a solid slab of concrete poured directly onto the earth. That was why Daniel's blood ran cold when he heard the first footstep above his head. It was heavy, deliberate, and metallic, like someone dragging an iron boot across the roof. Thud, drag, thud, drag. Daniel froze, holding his breath, his eyes wide as he stared up at the dark ceiling. He told himself it was just a fallen branch blowing in the wind, or perhaps a large animal that had climbed up from a nearby tree. But animals didn't walk with a rhythm that sounded so distinctly human, and branches didn't make the drywall ceiling vibrate. Thud, drag. The heavy steps moved slowly from the far side of the room toward the center, directly above where Daniel sat. The silence between each step was suffocating. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, but fear kept him pinned to the couch, his chest heaving silently in the dark. Then the footsteps stopped. The silence returned, thicker and heavier than before. Daniel remained motionless for what felt like 10 agonizing minutes, staring at the exact spot on the ceiling where the sound had halted. Nothing moved. Slowly, he reached down to grip the flashlight resting on the coffee table, his palms slick with sweat. He pressed the switch, and a thin beam of white light cut through the gloom, illuminating the ceiling. There were no cracks, no water stains, no signs of damage, just flat white paint. He began to let out a long, ragged exhale, convincing himself that the sound had been an auditory illusion brought on by fatigue and the howling wind outside. That was when he felt the floor beneath his feet vibrate. It wasn't a gentle tremor. It was a sharp, violent thud that echoed from directly beneath his bare feet. Daniel gasped, pulling his legs up onto the couch as if the floor had suddenly turned into boiling lava. He pointed the flashlight down at the ground. The smooth, polished concrete floor showed nothing, but another heavy impact struck from below, making the entire living room floor shudder. Thud. It sounded like a massive fist slamming against the underside of the concrete. Then came another thud, thud. A cold sweat broke out across Daniel's forehead. This house had no basement. He had watched the builders pour the concrete slab himself when he bought the land. It was 6 inches of solid concrete, resting directly on solid rock and dirt. There was no empty space down there, no room for a human or a creature to exist, let alone swing something heavy against the ground. Yet the sounds were unmistakable, and they were getting faster and more violent. Thud, thud, thud. The rhythm of the impacts changed, shifting from heavy thuds to the terrifying sound of iron-tipped boots walking briskly across a hollow surface, but it wasn't coming from above anymore. The footsteps were echoing from directly under the floorboards, pacing back and forth across the length of the living room. Thud, drag, thud, drag. It was the exact same heavy, metallic gait he had heard on the roof just minutes before, but now it was underneath him, trapped in a void that shouldn't exist. Panic completely overtook Daniel. He swung his feet off the couch, ignoring the primal terror urging him to stay off the ground, and bolted toward the front door. He grabbed the handle, twisted it, and pulled, but the door wouldn't budge. The deadbolt was unlocked, yet the heavy wooden door remained fused to its frame as if it had been welded shut from the outside. He slammed his shoulder against the wood once, twice, 3 times, but it remained completely unyielding. Desperate, he turned and sprinted toward the floor-to-ceiling glass windows that overlooked the dark backyard. He picked up a heavy bronze lamp from a side table and hurled it with all his strength against the glass. The lamp bounced off the window with a dull thud, leaving not even a scratch on the surface. The glass had become as impenetrable as solid steel. Behind him, the floor began to vibrate so violently that the coffee table slid an inch across the room. Daniel turned around, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, and shone his flashlight across the floor. The footsteps beneath the concrete had stopped pacing. They were now circling the room, moving along the perimeter, tracing the walls as if inspecting the boundaries of the house. Thud, drag. Then came the sound of scratching. It was a wet, metallic scraping noise, like massive iron fingernails dragging against the underside of the floor. The sound traveled along the edges of the room, coming closer and closer to where Daniel stood near the window. He backed up until his spine pressed hard against the unbreakable glass, his eyes wide, his breathing coming in ragged, shallow gasps. "Who's there?" Daniel screamed into the darkness, his voice cracking with pure terror. "What do you want?" There was no answer, only the relentless, rhythmic scraping from beneath the concrete. Then, right in the center of the living room, the concrete floor began to alter. In the beam of Daniel's flashlight, the smooth gray surface started to warp and flex, rippling like water. Small hairline cracks spread out across the center of the room, spider-webbing out toward the walls. From inside those cracks, a dark, viscous liquid began to bubble up, pooling on the surface and filling the room with a sharp, sickening smell of wet copper and decayed earth. Daniel watched in horror as the center of the living room floor slowly sank inward, creating a shallow, dark depression. The sound from below grew deafening, a mixture of wet tearing sounds and the echoing impact of heavy iron boots stepping onto something soft. The concrete was breaking apart, not from an explosion, but from being consumed from below. Large chunks of the floor vanished into a pitch-black abyss that was opening up in the middle of his house. From the depths of that black hole, the heavy footsteps began to climb, up thud, drag. The sound grew louder, closer, echoing out of the floor as if coming up a set of stone stairs. Daniel held his breath, unable to look away from the opening in the floor. A long, slender arm reached out from the pit and gripped the ragged edge of the broken concrete. The arm was impossibly long, covered in a tight, leathery black skin that stretched over sharp, angular bones, and its fingers ended in thick, jagged iron nails that tore into the solid stone-like paper. Another hand reached up and then the head emerged. It had no eyes, no nose, and no ears, only a smooth, pale mass of stretched skin dominated by a massive, vertical tear across the center of its face. The tear peeled open, revealing rows upon rows of jagged, metallic teeth that scraped against one another, with a sound that sent sharp needles of pain through Daniel's ears. The creature hoisted itself out of the abyss, its long, jointed limbs unfolding like a grotesque spider made of iron and bone. It stood up, towering over 7 feet tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. It didn't breathe. It didn't make a sound. It simply turned its faceless head toward Daniel. Standing at the edge of the dark hole, it had shredded through the solid foundation. Daniel shrank against the glass, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold the flashlight. The beam flickered and died, plunging the room into absolute darkness. In the blackness, Daniel heard the heavy, metallic boot hit the floor, thud, then the drag. The creature was stepping out of the pit, moving slowly across the ruined living room floor, stepping over the broken concrete, advancing directly toward the sound of Daniel's terrified breathing. Daniel closed his eyes, pressing his head back against the cold window pane, paralyzed by the realization that there was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide, and no ground solid enough beneath his feet to save him. The heavy metallic footsteps stopped right in front of him, and the sharp, freezing smell of old earth and rusted iron filled the dark air around his face. Next, Story 2 is begin. The storm outside was brutal, pounding heavy rain against the glass of the quiet suburban house. But inside, the air was entirely still. Leo woke up at precisely 2 o'clock in the morning to a sound that made his stomach instantly drop into a cold void. It was not the wind, nor was it the gentle creaking of an old house settling into the night. It was the distinct, deliberate click of a floorboard giving way under human weight on the ground floor directly beneath his bedroom. He lay paralyzed in his dark room, staring at the ceiling, his breathing suspended as he listened with every fiber of his being. A second later, another muffled footstep echoed through the hallway below, followed by the faint rustle of clothing. Someone was inside his home, moving with a calm, unhurried precision that made the blood run cold in his veins. Slowly, carefully, Leo rolled off the side of his mattress, ensuring his weight shifted without making the bed springs squeak. He slid to his knees on the carpet, his hands searching blindly in the dark until his fingers wrapped around the cold, solid metal of the aluminum baseball bat leaning against his nightstand. Holding the weapon tightly against his chest, he slunk across the carpet toward the closet near the corner of the room. He eased the closet door open, stepped inside amidst the soft hanging shirts, and pulled the louvered door closed until only a tiny horizontal gap remained, open for him to peer through. He pulled his legs in, crouched low between his winter coats, and waited, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Downstairs, the footsteps stopped for a few excruciating minutes, replaced by the faint sound of drawers sliding open and shut with extraordinary care. Leo squeezed the grip of the bat until his knuckles turned ghostly white, convincing himself that this was just an ordinary burglar looking for quick cash, a misplaced wallet or expensive electronics. If he just stayed quiet and remained hidden in the dark, the intruder would take what he wanted and leave into the night. But then the footsteps began again, and this time, they were not moving toward the front door or the kitchen exit. They were coming toward the wooden staircase that led directly to the second floor. Each step up the staircase was slow, measured, and terrifyingly heavy. 1, 2, 3. The intruder was not trying to mask his presence entirely, yet he moved with a disturbing lack of rush, as if he owned the house and knew nobody could stop him. Leo watched through the thin, wooden slats of his closet door as a shadow stretched across the hallway floor. Outside his bedroom, the cracked bedroom door creaked slowly inward, pushed open by a long arm clad in a tight black sleeve. A tall figure stepped quietly into the bedroom. In the pale blue light filtering through the rain-streaked window, Leo could see the intruder clearly. The man was wearing a plain, featureless white mask that lacked eyes, nose or mouth, just a smooth, lifeless oval of plastic polished to a dull shine. He wore dark, tactical clothing, and over his shoulder hung a heavy, dark canvas bag that smelled faintly of copper and iron. Leo pressed his hand over his mouth, holding his breath until his lungs burned, terrified that even the subtle sound of his breathing would betray his hiding spot. The intruder did not head for the expensive laptop sitting open on the desk near the window. He did not touch the heavy silver watch sitting on the dresser, nor did he look toward the leather wallet resting plainly on the nightstand. He completely ignored every object of value in the room. Instead, he walked with a strange, liquid grace straight toward the side of Leo's empty bed. He stopped right beside the nightstand, turning his smooth, featureless mask toward the empty pillows as if contemplating the absence of a sleeper. Then, the intruder lowered his heavy canvas bag to the floor without making a sound. He unzipped the bag slowly, reaching both hands inside. When he pulled his hands out, Leo nearly gasped aloud, forcing his own teeth into the skin of his wrist to keep from screaming. In the stranger's gloved hands was a fresh, heavy human skull. It was not an antique or a prop. It was dripping with dark, wet blood that glistened under the dim moonlight, pooling onto the crisp, white sheets of the nightstand. As the man carefully set it down right next to Leo's phone, the jaw was locked open in a silent scream, and fresh crimson streaks ran down its hollow eye sockets. The intruder adjusted the position of the bloody skull until it faced directly toward the pillows, as if aligning a gruesome spectator to watch over the bed. He then reached deep into his jacket pocket and pulled out an expensive DSLR camera equipped with a massive professional flash unit. He brought the camera up to his face, aimed it squarely at the empty bed, the bloody skull and the tangled bed sheets, and pressed the shutter button. A blinding, violent flash of light exploded in the bedroom, casting sharp, unnatural shadows against the walls and illuminating the entire space for a fraction of a second. In that brief, agonizing instant of light, Leo saw the reflection of his own wide, terrified eyes reflected in the glossy surface of the white mask. The intruder had not just taken a picture of the bed. He had deliberately aimed the angle of the lens to capture the gap in the closet doors where Leo was hiding. The silence that followed the flash was absolute, broken only by the steady hum of the rain outside. The intruder slowly lowered the camera back to his chest, but he did not run, nor did he draw a weapon. He stood completely still, his masked head tilting slightly to the left as he stared directly at the exact closet slat. Leo was looking through. He knew. He had known the entire time. Slowly, deliberately, the intruder raised his right hand, extending 2 fingers toward the closet. He tapped his index and middle fingers against his mask right where his eyes should be, gesturing that he was watching, before bringing those same blood-stained fingers down to point, straight at Leo's face. He leaned down slightly, his head stopping just inches from the louvered wooden door of the closet, close enough that Leo could hear the soft, rhythmic rasp of the man's breath passing through small ventilation holes near the chin of the mask. Then, in a soft, calm, almost affectionate whisper that chilled Leo to his very core, the man spoke. "See you tomorrow night for part 2. Without waiting for a response, the intruder turned smoothly on his heel, swung the heavy canvas bag back over his shoulder, and walked out of the bedroom. His footsteps descended the stairs with the exact same steady, unhurried rhythm with which he had arrived. A few moments later, the heavy front door clicked shut, followed by the faint sound of tires rolling slowly away on the wet asphalt outside. Leo remained curled in the corner of the closet for nearly an hour, unable to move his limbs, his body shaking uncontrollably, while the cold metal of the baseball bat slipped from his numb fingers. When he finally found the strength to push the closet door open and stumble into the room, his eyes landed on the nightstand. The bloody skull remained where it had been placed, staring at him with empty sockets while a thick, dark pool of blood slowly dripped off the edge of the wood, dropping rhythmically onto the rug below. On the desk nearby, his laptop screen suddenly lit up on its own, displaying a single notification from an unknown sender that contained a clear, high-resolution photograph. It was the picture taken just minutes ago, showing the bloody skull on the nightstand and in the dark background, clearly visible through the slats of the closet door, were Leo's own pale, terrified eyes staring back at the lens. Beneath the image, a small text caption flickered on the screen, 320 days, left to collect the set.